Okay, so it's my honor to be speaking to you today. I was instantly enrolled when Niall told me that the Weekend University aims to bring psychology to the general public. My own mentor and business partner and dear friend, actually, from 1991 to 2007, when he died, was a brilliant, if yet unsung, clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and theologian called Dr. K. Bradford Brown, known as Brad to those of us who loved him. And he was, to name a few, he was a direct student of Viktor Frankl, the Auschwitz survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, Carl Rogers, who founded one of the founders of the humanistic psychology movement, and of Alan Watts, who brought Eastern philosophy to the West. So those are some of the giants on whose shoulders I stand today. And when Brad was practicing, he had a psychotherapy practice in the States, he became, this was in the 70s, so he became increasingly troubled by three things. Firstly, the dependence of the client on the therapist, who was the keeper of the wisdom, which the client needed to come back again week after week after week, month after month after month, year after year after year, to access said wisdom. Secondly, and this was especially true back then, psychotherapy was primarily available to the mentally ill and not to the mentally well. That's changed some, I'm very glad to say, but at that time it troubled him very much. And he was also troubled by the intellectualization and mystification of psychological practices that anyone could benefit from if they could be simplified, codified, and made more broadly available. So today would have been right up his Strauza. In fact, he made it his life's mission to demystify psychology and theology while he was at it. He was also a theologian. And to develop practical transformative tools that anybody could use to create improvements and changes, especially to the quality of their lives. So I came across Brad's work in my early 20s. I would not say I was mentally well at this point in time. I presented that to the world, but there was a big incongruence between what I presented to the world and what I felt inside. And I was in psychotherapy at that point in time, and I was exploring everything in psychology, personal growth, the New Age movement. I did it lock, stock, barrel full of crystals. And then I experienced a weekend course that Brad had created, and I really never looked back from that moment in time. And I then dedicated myself to becoming a master practitioner of the methodology that he created and a teacher of that methodology, which I've been doing for a long time. So I've worked in the field of human and corporate transformation for 27 years now. But sadly, calling myself an agent of transformation these days is almost as innocuous as calling myself a life coach. Because in the last 20 years, we have so overused that word, we've almost killed it. So much so that in a relatively recent survey with business leaders, transformation topped the list of jargon words they want to get rid of, closely followed by disruption and millennials. Yeah, we get that. So, but how sad is that we've reduced one of the most magical words in the English language to jargon? So I want to qualify my claim to it just for a moment. I've told you my background and my training with Brad. For 27 years, I've helped, I would say, tens of thousands of people change and improve the quality of their lives. I've worked with ex-criminals, homeless people, famous people, 18-year-olds, 80-year-olds, educators, artists, leaders, executives, but mostly ordinary people wanting to create extraordinary things with what they've been given. I spent 20 years running a business with Brad, and have helped many leading brands respond creatively to changing winds, and sometimes transform parts of their business, and occasionally help them transform the entire business. I didn't do it, they did it, which is proportionally as I think it should be, which I'll say more about later. So then something happened a few years ago. In 2014, I was diagnosed with late-stage terminal cancer, and I was given a few months to live at that point in time. My daughter was 4 years old, and I celebrated my 5-year cancerversary in October 2019. I'm very proud to say. I still have cancer, by the way, but it doesn't have me. So that experience catapulted me. I mean, it put it to me to walk my talk like that had never been put to me before. And it catapulted me into the most brutal and transformational period of my entire life. So during this time, I've had multiple brain tumors 4 times. I've had radiotherapy to my spine, my neck, 27 brain tumors in one sitting. I was watching all that neuroplasticity earlier and going, whoa, my brain is scarred. But I felt proud of it, that it's been through so much and I can still speak a coherent sentence, actually. I've nearly died twice. It's been very, very challenging. But it's also been wondrous. I mean, truly wondrous. I've written 2 life-transforming books in that time, and I found myself becoming, one of which was The Cancer Whisperer, and I found myself becoming a high-profile patient activist. The book's about how to navigate the psychological challenges of getting a cancer diagnosis, and it hit a sweet spot and went boom. And I found myself in service to cancer patients around the world, primarily helping them take hold of their fear. Because if we don't take hold of our fear, it will take hold of us and it will run the show and make the decisions. And I literally watch patients die of shock. That's been scientifically validated now. It's called the nocebo effect. I watch myself nearly die of shock. So that is a privilege I could not have planned, but it is part of what I do now. So through all these experiences, I have, along the way, identified what I am calling the most critical and resisted factors for lasting change. And I'm going to share those in part 2 of this talk. But I want to start with another word that we have generalized and glorified into near oblivion, the word motivation. So when you Google the word motivation, the internet nearly blows up. If you Google motivational speaker, I think there's like 25, 30 million things come up, like I'm a motivational speaker, check me out. So generally motivation is seen as a good thing. And it's important when you want to, when you want to create change that lasts. Motivation is a pretty critical piece. But there's a lot of rah-rah, motivate your people, are you motivated, books about motivation. I mean, it's like an industry, actually. But an amoeba is motivated. Bin Laden was motivated. Hitler was extremely motivated. Extremely. So the important question isn't, are you motivated, but what are you motivated by? Equally, if you want to make a change in your life, why? What is your motive for action? Every action has a motive. So that's the place we need to start when you want to make changes in your lives. Now, there are basically two states of mind, states of being. One is a state of reactivity, a reactive state, which is separating, limiting, and self-deceiving. And the other is a responsive state, which is connecting, expansive, and self-realizing. Now, you're either in one or the other. There's no half pregnant. There's no halfway in and halfway out. You're either in or you're out. And I hope what I'm going to be doing today is languaging your experience. Like, yeah, I know about that. I don't think I'm going to be saying anything particularly new with this, but I hope it's going to give you a language for your own experience and a lens through which you can look at your lives. So I'm calling this in the box and out of the box, and I know thinking outside the box generally means thinking unconventionally. So this is another way of looking at the box entirely. So when we're reactive, these are the kinds of feelings we have: anger, fear, anxiety, panic, stress, resentment, guilt, shame, despair. They're not all in here. But also numbness. So how many of you, sometimes someone says, what are you feeling? And you go, I don't know. You just don't know what you're feeling. You're just numbed out. That's a sign that you're in the box. How many of you say, I'm fine? Also a sign that you're in the box. So you may not necessarily be feeling the fear, but if you're not feeling, that is a clue right there. And numbness is a feeling. So also when you're in the box, we behave in certain ways. And part of what is important is for you to observe, how do I behave when I'm in the box? So you might fit in or rebel. You might comply or defy. You might dominate or shrink away. You might play small or get superior. There are many, many different behaviors. You might be very pleasing, try to fix things. You might blame people. You might avoid things. So there are many, many different behaviors. What matters is, what are mine? Because it's our feelings and our behaviors that tell us our state. You can identify if you're in or out of the box by what you're feeling and how you're behaving. Now, there's also an important difference between feelings and thoughts, so I'm going to come to that in a bit. When you're out of the box, you're responsive and you feel joy, peace, awe, vibrancy, hope, courage, intuition, authority, clarity, vision, gratitude. It's a completely different state of being. It's very connecting, and actually grief is outside the box, which some of you may want to know more about later, because grief connects. But in Western society, we have done grief a great injustice, in my opinion, which I'm happy to talk about later. But it's a very powerful, healing, connecting force if we get into right relationship with it. So this is where we find our power and our resourcefulness and our we see possibilities, we see the possibilities. And this is where lasting change really becomes possible. Do you recognize both these states? I hope you know them both. Now, one of the things, this is changing, I'm glad to say, but it's still a prevailing perception, and it's even a perception in some psychological disciplines, that we go in the box when something happens we don't like. And we get out of the box when something happens that we do like. right? So I run into a massive jam on the M25, I go in the box. Someone I love asks me to marry him, I get out of the box. Now, obviously these events have an impact. They have an impact. However, what puts us in the box actually is what we believe and how we perceive what's happening. So, and that's kind of good news, because if the events are what put you in or get you out, external events, then you're at the effect of life either way, right? You're just waiting for the next nice thing to happen for you to feel better. So one of my teachers was an amazing woman called Sue Oldham, and she actually led that first course that I didn't look back from. I'd never seen a more powerful woman in my whole life. And I didn't really get what she was teaching at the time, but I just kept thinking, I don't know what she's got, but I want some. And I kind of went back for more on that basis, because she showed me that we've mislocated power in our brains, brawn and genitals, when actually our power is in clarity of mind, an open heart and a very firm backbone, and is therefore the access of each gender in equal measure. So that was an amazing thing. But the way she got into the work, she used to be a counsellor at a school. And one day, this true story, this girl came in really down, crying, very despondent. And Sue said, "What's happened?" She said, "My parents are getting divorced. And it's the worst possible thing. I'm going to have to choose between them. I'm going to have to spend Christmases apart. I'm going to have to move between houses. It's the worst thing that could happen. I can't bear it." And she was gutted about it. Same day, another girl skips into Sue's office, very buoyant, very happy. And she goes, "What happened?" "My parents are getting divorced." Best news ever, because the arguing's going to stop. I'm going to get 2 homes, 2 Christmases. She couldn't be happier that this has gone on. Well, true story, these 2 girls were sisters in the same family. And that's when Sue started to get, how we perceive what's happening has a lot to do with what we experience. Now, back to motivation. There are actually more than one box. And I'm going to talk now about 5 different motives for action, primary motives for action. Beginning with that little box in the middle, which is a state that I call impossibility. And it's primarily driven by the thought that I can't. I can't handle it, I can't cope, I can't handle it, I can't do it, I can't pull it off, I just can't do it. Now, some can'ts are true. I can't do cartwheels. I watch my daughter doing cartwheels frequently, do not know how she came out of my womb. So some can'ts are true, but many, many are not true. I mean, I came home the other day and I've had several punctures in the last few months, and my tire pressure light came on again. And I handed my husband the car keys and said, "Tire pressures, I can't deal." And I could deal, but I can't deal with it again. I just can't. You have those moments like that. And bless him, he went to deal with it because he's a sucker. No, I'm kidding. Dear, very helpful having a practical husband when you're in possibility. But behaviorally, you give up, or you don't care, or you leave things alone, or you let it be, or you avoid, or there's no motivation in this box. Motivation is 0. And at its most extreme, this is where people take their own lives. I had a very dear friend who jumped off Chiswick Bridge with a heavy weight tied around his waist some years ago. And when he hit the water, He cried help and tried to swim. There was a witness, but he drowned. But in the moment he hit the water, he woke up out of this box. You see how that works? Like, oh, I want to live, actually. So this is a state of despair, of really true hopelessness, despair, paralyzing sometimes. It can be paralyzing. And it's rooted in, it's not just, I can't handle it because it's pointless and hopeless, and I'm pointless and hopeless, actually. That's often running underneath, but it's unconscious. I'm a pointless, hopeless, worthless loser in life, so I may as well give up on my life. So this is something you can go into about your tire pressures, or you can go into in a very, very life-threatening way, actually. The second box is called survival. Now, survival, you've got a lot more room to move, and you can achieve a lot in this state, a lot. In fact, you have to achieve it in this state. So survival is driven by I have to, as in subtext, there's no other option. I have to do this, I have to do it, I have to be this way, this is how it has to be. And when we're in this, I have to get by, I have to fight, struggle on, protect, defend. You may just have one of these, not all of them. I have to make the best of, I have to pretend, I have to look good, I have to fit in, I have to be nice. I have to try really hard, I have to work really hard, I have to. And often this is what we hear in our heads. But the bottom, this is a generator, I call it a stress generator. At the bottom is, because if I don't, I have to be these ways, or else I'm going to look bad, I'm going to fail, I'm going to be humiliated, I'm going to be laughed at, I'm going to be ridiculed, people are going to find out what a lousy human being I am, I'm going to end up sleeping under the arches, because basically I'm just not a good enough person, which we had earlier, we heard at the end of the last session. And therefore, I have to. Now, it can be highly stressful, this state, and you can be almost in a panic, but you can also go quite numb and just get very task-focused and very busy. And if anyone gets in my way, you get them out of the way, like that. And actually, many of us spend a lot of our lives in this box and don't even know we're in it. We call it living. And you can see the feelings that it generates in the center of that image, the anxiety and the stress. So again, to give you, actually before I give you an example, I want to speak about the not good enough thing that came up at the end of the last talk. Very brave gentleman who asked the question said, I feel I'm not good enough. And then you were asked how many of you have felt you're not good enough, and almost every hand in this room went up. Almost every hand. The thing is, I'm not good enough is a belief, not a feeling. We say I feel I'm not good enough, and then it becomes like that's who I am, that's my reality. And actually, I believe I'm not good enough. And when I believe I'm not good enough, I feel anxious, lonely, and depressed. Makes sense? So the belief causes the feeling. And it's a very important distinction to make, because feelings are true. You really experience what you feel. But the beliefs that cause them are often not true and need to be challenged. So much of this thinking, the delusional thinking that also came up, I'm going to be speaking a lot about delusional thinking today. So survival, one example, I'll give you two examples. One is I worked with a retail company once, and they brought me in to improve their customer service. And when I went in, I found out they had 40% staff turnover. I thought, oh, that's very, very interesting. And what I found was a culture, their entire business culture, pretty much was in survival. And they were all running around, busy, really, really stressed, very low morale, very successful business. But there was high anxiety all over the place and quite a bullying leadership, actually. So, and there were two prevailing mindsets in that business. One was, I have to get everything right or else I will be reprimanded and humiliated. And the second was, I have to be positive all the time or I will be seen as weak or as a failure. And this was all over the business. So our job became to get the culture out of survival, actually, and more on that another time if there's time. But so it can be very personal, but it can spread like a disease, actually. And I went into survival. I mean, you can imagine I've been in and out of this quite a lot in the last 5 years. But I went into it, I really went into it, what I call my darkest hour was when they'd found tumours in my lung, my lymph nodes, my shoulders, my ribs, my spine. And I went to see my oncologist to plan my treatments. And I went on my own because we were just planning my treatments. And it was November, and it was the evening, and it was very dark. And I sat in his office, and he said, he had my brain scan. And he said, I'm very, very sorry, Mrs. Sabbage, but you have brain tumours. And I said, how many? And he said, more than we can count. More than we can count. And I've booked you on Monday to have urgent whole brain radiotherapy. So I just dived into this box. Tears are streaming down my face. And I'm shaking. My daughter's 4 years old at this point. And I'm telling myself, let me introduce the crafty little sucker to you. I'm telling myself, I have to do what he says. I have to let him fry my brain. I have to fight with all I've got. Because if I don't survive, if I don't live, I'm going to devastate my family. I'm going to devastate them. And if I devastate my family and leave my child, that makes me a terrible, terrible mother. And it means I'm a loser and a wastrel and I've completely wasted my life. So I have to go along with this. Even though all my intuitive red lights were flashing. No. Do you know this voice in your head? You know you have a mind, you're not your mind? I have a mind. I'm not my mind. So one of the things we need to learn to do is put a ring in its nose. Only permanent solution I've ever found is a frontal lobotomy, but you can get very, very skilled at putting a ring in its nose. So fortunately for me, I knew I was in survival. I knew it. All I knew was that I was in survival. And I said to him, you need to cancel that appointment. We're not going to do that treatment, at least not yet. And he was, but. I said, no, I need to go and educate myself. But equally, I was thinking, I need to get myself out of the box before I make any decisions whatsoever. Survival. I mean, that was literally a survival thing, but mainly it's not. Mainly not your life is literally on the line, as it was in that case. Often it's just, I'm going to lose face, or, something's on the line that you don't want to have on the line in your head. The next box is called obligation. And obligation is motivated by I should, or I ought. And this is a state of doing your duty, doing the right thing. So I really should do the right thing, do my best, think of others. And sometimes you want to do the right thing, but the important clue here is, are you choosing to do the right thing, or are you telling yourself you should do the right thing? There's a difference. I should conform, I should be please other people, I should do what's expected, I should be professional, I should be perfect, I should be. like that. And, or else I'm going to let people down, I'm going to be unpopular, unreliable, not a good person, I'm going to cause pain, disappoint people, be a disappointment, be rejected, lonely, outcast, weirdo, worthless, unlovable. I mean, you may just have one of those, by the way. Some have all of them. But these are core beliefs at the bottom of the generator. They're often, as I say, unconscious. And then the beliefs at the top are guiding beliefs that literally guide your behavior. So if you are telling yourself, I really should be nice to this person, then I'm going to see you being nice, right? I really should be polite about this, even though I want to punch someone's in the face. I'll see you being polite. Slightly tight jaw, probably, but polite. So it literally drives your behavior. What you tell yourself you have to do or be is how you will behave. That's how it works. It's a kind of psychologic. So an obligation is, well, how many of you are doing your taxes at this time? Because you really should do your taxes right. I mean, many people do their taxes in obligation, or visit their mother-in-laws in obligation, or. You can get very resentful in this state because you're kind of nice and pleasing and you fit in and you do what's right, but at some point you're going to snap and resent it. So it's unsustainable in that sense. You know, you might comply, and then you defy. You know, I really should lose 10 pounds. You're going to end up in the biscuit cupboard at some point because you really should. You know, I really should go to the gym. At some point, you're going to skip the gym, you know, in kind of day-to-day terms. And this is important when you want to make change. If it's a should, you're pretty likely to go off-piste. Now, I saw a much more dangerous example of this. I've seen it many times in the last few years in the cancer world. Actually, I see patients going into this. I should do what my doctor says. I shouldn't ask questions. I should make my oncologist happy. I mean, I really hear all this. I shouldn't challenge. I should do exactly what I'm told, because if I don't, then they might not treat me. And he might not do his best by me, so I'm just going to be a really good patient. I see that a lot. I don't go there very much, personally. In fact, I saw this, I went to a hospital for a scan, and someone had accidentally left my file open on the desk. And in big red letters it said, difficult patient. And I went, yes, I'll take that. Thank you very much. It was a very proud moment for me, actually. Very, very proud moment for me. But I've also seen oncologists go in this box by, you know, I should do exact protocol and I should follow the rules. I should follow the medical rules. That's how it goes. And they don't get out of the box and into creativity or even check what's the latest research, what's the latest data, is there anything new on the market? And sometimes, to be fair, it's because they're exhausted and stressed out and they've just got too much to do, so they, you know, they're human beings, right? I've had multiple brain tumors 4 times and I'm yet to have whole brain radiotherapy, which is the standard protocol. It's the standard protocol. Now, I know twice I've had my brain tumors cleared with these breakthrough TKI drugs that target particular mutations. But I know patients whose oncologists have had them do whole brain radiation before even testing them for the mutations. And then they've tested positive, and their brain could have been cleared without that very damaging treatment. So it can be that severe. It's blinding, you see. When you're in the box, you're blinding. You're blind to something, always. You're kidding yourself in some way about something. So, do you recognize this box? Great. Okay, this one is much more tricky to spot because it's really juicy. It's juicy, it's fun, it's sexy, it's full of adrenaline, it's exciting, you feel kind of powerful when you're in this box. It's called proving, and it's driven by I desire, i.e. I really, really, really want it, subtext, and I have to have it. Okay, this is different to your heart's desires. They're out of the box. This is the mind's desires. And when you're in this state, you have to do more, get more, be more, have more. You're going to be sent these, by the way. I have to stand out, I have to be the success, I have to, I want to excel, I want to stand out, I want to achieve, I want to be awesome, I want to be win, I want to be adored, I want to be famous, I mean, like that. Or else, I'll be found out and exposed as the loser, not good enough scumbag that I really know I am. Right. And, you know, that's always what's underneath running. And when you're in this state, you set a goal, achieve it, get a quick fix of satisfaction, then what do you do? Set another goal, get a quick fix of satisfaction. It's never, ever, 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 ever enough. It's the never enough box. And it runs the Western world in many ways, in my opinion. It runs the Western world. It ultimately is unsustainable. It's ultimately burnout. One of my clients was HBOS, and they suddenly announced a £10 billion loss. Well, that's because the traders had been operating in their blind desire and their blind greed, and they killed the business by doing that. So. It's seductive, but it's never enough. And it's also why some extremely successful people sometimes commit suicide. Because they've achieved so much, but the one thing they haven't yet achieved is their enoughness. That's the one thing. So they're never, ever fulfilled. So I've created all this success in my life and I'm still not fulfilled. Well, it's game over. And then they're in impossibility and despair. And in our culture, you know, the quarter-life crisis has now replaced the midlife crisis. And for millennials who, you know, aren't famous and followed by millions by the time they're 30, which is what they desire, then they're nobodies. They think they're nobodies and that their lives have failed. I mean, it's devastating. I've just created a course called The Quarter-Life Crisis to work with these young people on this issue, and the X Factor and Love Island and all this just feeds the beast, feeds the beast, feeds the beast. So this is the most deceptive and seductive of them all because it feels powerful. I spent a lot of my 20s in this box. I don't know when I decided I was unlovable, but at some point in my life I decided I was unlovable and that the best I could get was people's admiration. So I needed to prove my worth by being admirable and smart and clever and successful, and you know, and I drove myself hard, and I got a first-class degree, and then I got a job at the BBC, and then I got another job at a consulting company while I was doing a master's, and you know, I was proving myself. But while all that was going on, I mean, I was a workaholic, actually. I became a workaholic. I became very lonely. I separated and isolated a lot from my friends. I was severely bulimic, and I was addicted to cannabis. So at my most successful time, I was at my most screwed up and lost, actually. And that was... sometimes you need to be brought to your knees to break the back of this. Life kind of needs to break the back of it in some way. And I still drop into it sometimes, but I pretty much broke the back of it in my 30s. So that's proving. How many of you recognize this one? Excellent. Okay, now, let me just pause for a minute. It's really important to say about these states that they're normal. So let's not say being in the box is bad and being out of the box is good, because they're normal. In fact, being in the box is automatic and normal, unless you consciously get yourself out of it, actually. It's kind of an automatic state of consciousness. So there's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, sometimes I suggest we just need to go to our not enoughness to get our enoughness. Sometimes that just needs to happen. But whenever you're in the box, you're kidding yourself about something. You're not in realistic thinking, you're in self-deception. And you're looking at the world and life through your beliefs and judgments and fears and not enoughness and you're an assholeness and all of that. And I know how life should be, by the way. You know, I know how life should be, except it isn't the way you think it should be. So you can't see what's really so, because you're looking through that filter all the time. Which brings me to creating. There is no box here. It's just an expansive, incredibly expansive space. Now this is a place where, I mean, I showed you the slide with all the feelings on it before, but you know, I had a friend who spent a lot of her marriage, she spent 27 years in obligation in her marriage. And she gave up on her own dreams and what she wanted to do with her life. And her husband was quite controlling, and he gave her a little budget every month to buy food for the kids. He was very wealthy. And she was an amazing mother. And then he had an affair and divorced her after 27 years. And that took her to the depths of her grief, actually. But in that experience, she found out and remembered what she wanted to do with her life and what mattered to her and who she wanted to be. And she was a physiotherapist, and she actually now teaches. She started to teach this work because it got her through that time. So she's, when we're in the box, we often give up on our dreams because we've made ourselves not matter anymore. Alternatively, this is another self-deception. I have a friend who wrote a book 20 years ago, and it's been rejected I don't know how many times by publishers, and she keeps amending it and amending it and amending it. And sometimes you just need a break with a book. But the reality is she's just not a very good writer. She just doesn't write very well. But she, on and on, she desires so much to be a published author that she's not doing what she's really shines at. She used to be a TV presenter. She's amazing on television. But no, she's given that up because this is what I want. So when you're in this space of creating, you know who you are and you know what you're not. Both. You know your true gifts and true qualities, but you also know your true limitations. Both. And you work with both. And you create with both. And you make choices out of both those things. So this really is the place where you can accept the things you cannot change, change the things you can, and find the wisdom to know the difference. This is where that happens, right here. So, I mean, just to give you another example of it, a personal example of it. When I was, in those first few months when I was diagnosed, and I was dying, I was coughing blood and I was losing breath, and I was in very, very deep trouble. And you know, I was in survival for a lot of the time, but I remember I needed to get rid of any shreds or any leftovers of my life isn't valuable. Anything that was left hanging around in me to say my life isn't worth something, my life doesn't matter. And there were some dregs of that, actually. So I needed to really claim the value of my life to give me put the fuel in my rocket that would give me a shot, just give me a shot. I needed to simultaneously fully face into the brutal reality of my situation. I needed to fully face into that while fully allowing my spirit to rise with a fierceness I did not know I had. To just let it rise, just fully rise. And I remember choosing, I wrote this down, I choose to live in the space between my fierce will to live and my necessary willingness to die. That's where I choose to live. Highly recommend it, by the way, without getting terminal cancer, to put you there, to live in that space. And I created strategies for my living and my dying, but I still have strategies for my living and my dying. Do you get the realism of this? But out of that came the most creative period I've ever been through. And, you know, it's been the most productive and vulnerable 5 years of my life. Vulnerable and productive. And I'm very clear now that those two things walk hand in hand, by the way. Hand in hand. Say more about that in a minute. So this is, I choose to because, instead of I have to or else, I choose to because I take risks, be bold, be truthful, be vulnerable, discover, learn, take a stand, innovate, open to possibilities, take responsibility, surrender, embrace failure. I choose all of that because I'm okay. I'm acceptable and lovable and imperfect and human and committed, and I am who I am. I'm okay with who I am. I don't need to prove myself to you. I'm okay. I'm not perfect, but I'm okay. Therefore, what do I choose? How do I choose to be? What do I choose to do? And suddenly you're free. I mean, suddenly you're free. And then your mind will kick in again, put you back in the box and go, well, that was a waste of time. You believed that woman at that lecture. Sucker. But this is an incredibly powerful space to live in, but it's also a place we can live with great humility. And if we don't have that humility, then I suggest you're in the box of desire. And when the ego takes over, it's something else. Okay. So, in summary of this particular part of the talk, there are 5 ways to change. Impossibility, no way. Survival, one way, only option. Obligation, your way. Desire, my way. And out of the box is the free way. That's my summary of 5 ways to change, 5 motives, different motivational states. Okay. Is this clear? Is this great? Okay, now, also always remember that we go in and out and in and out and in and out. What we need to learn to do is notice when we're in and get out again. But assume you will keep going in. So the question is, are you going to notice when you're in? And then there are ways to get out, some of which I'm about to come to. So, I mentioned earlier that I've identified some critical factors for lasting change. And these relate to how we shift our state, by the way. So I'm going to just go through these now. We're fine. The first is what I call precipitating life shocks. So all transformation is precipitated by an external perception-shattering event. Some external thing happens that challenges prevailing paradigms, that challenges reactive behavior, that challenges in-the-box beliefs. So a life shock is a collision point between the world as I expect it to be and think it should be, and the world as it really is and how it comes to me. So in a way, they're like little harbingers of reality. If you're in the box, you're in self-deception, and you run into reality, right? You run into life as it really is, rather than life as you think it is. So life shocks, they just keep coming. They knock on our boxes of self-deception, and it's a bit like a piece of grit getting into an oyster shell and triggering an interaction that produces a pearl. The same transformational power, if we know how to harness the power of life shocks. So we get them every day, dozens a day. You can get a small life shock like my tire pressures going down, life shock. Getting a bill that's higher than you had budgeted for, life shock. I mean, these are just day-to-day life shocks, right? Seeing your cellulite in the mirror. These kinds of life shocks are just going on. I shouldn't have that, right? I should not have that cellulite. So now I'm in the box saying I've got to get rid of my cellulite. So there are life shocks like that. And then there are the ones that penetrate more. So I say resisted because, by the way, we want to return them to sender. Send back the life shock, I don't want it. I'm going to resist it, avoid it, duck it, dive it. But they keep coming. And some of them get through. So I remember my dad he was dying of lung cancer. And he'd had an operation that paralyzed his hand like this. And I remember holding his hand between mine, both mine, on his deathbed. And I felt it relax as he took his last breath. Life shock. They're very specific, by the way. My dad's death is a life event. But that moment was a life shock that went in. A few days ago, my daughter came home from a netball match and said, I said, how was it, and how are you doing? And she said, Mummy, nobody wants to sit next to me on the school bus. I mean, just saying it back to you just chokes me, just Mrs. Sabbage, you need to put your affairs in order. So life shocks. I'm sure you've had some very significant life shocks during your lifetimes. But here's the good news about life shocks. So when you're in the box, you're going to get a life shock to let you know you're in the box. I mean, they're completely count-onable because you're kidding yourself and reality is just being reality, right? So it's going to keep coming at you until you pay attention. So if you get one, if you miss one, you'll get another one. And if you miss that one, you get another one, and another one, another one, another one, until you pay attention, till you wake up, pay attention to what's going on. Some people stay in the box their entire lives, like my darling mother. I've never seen her out of the box. She's relentlessly victimized by her life, relentlessly. And however many life shocks come her way, she just stays asleep and drinks more whiskey. That's how it is for her, and I've learned to see her. I've learned to see her and love her and honor her, even though I want something else for her. But they will keep coming. This is why I wrote a book called Life Shocks and How to Love Them. It's a very, very generous system. Very generous. So, life shocks. Now, I'm going to come back to what we were talking about earlier about realistic thinking. So, we need to make reality-aligning shifts in perception, what I'm calling the authentic, not the positive kind. So someone asked about positive psychology earlier. So I do get the positive, negative in terms of I like this and I don't like that. Fair enough. However, there's a lot of mindset experts around at the moment and a lot of bullshit affirmations and mantras, and, you know, so what I'm not interested in us doing is shifting the false negative, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, to I'm awesome and amazeballs. There's a lot of that going on if you watch it on the, I'm amazeballs. Well, no, you're not. None of those statements are fundamentally or permanently true, sorry. I'm okay as I am, let's start there. I'm lovable, I'm forgivable, I'm acceptable, I'm fallible. Sometimes I do amazing things and sometimes I screw up, but I'm okay. And I'm worthy. I'm worthy of life and I'm worthy of love. I suggest that's as much truth as we can stand on. And the rest is either false negative or false positive. So I'm not a fan of positivity, I'm sorry. Most of the time I don't think it's any more helpful than negativity. Negativity paints dark clouds on blue skies. Positivity paints pink clouds on dark skies. Or as I prefer to say, it puts icing on dog shit and calls it a cake. You know, it does. Let's not put icing on dog shit and call it a cake. Let's not do that. Let's keep things real. Let's be real about ourselves and who we are. And this is really important. So, again, let me give you just a few examples of this. So, I was working in a pharmaceutical company last week. I was speaking to the oncology department of a pharmaceutical company, and they kept talking about the trial that they were running. They kept saying, the patient failed the trial. And I was like, huh? You know, I kept getting cognitive dissonance. You know, I was just like, what? I'm going, don't you mean the trial failed the patient? The patient failed the treatment, that was it. The treatment failed the patient. I mean, it was like this really fascinating shift that needed to happen in the room for them to stop seeing patients as numbers, let alone as human beings, let alone as that, which is partly what they invited me in, to remind them that patients are human beings. Oh dear. So, but really, they do need reminding, I can assure you. In my 20s, I firmly believed I was not good enough at this point, but especially not good enough as a woman, and not a good enough woman. And I had a boyfriend who also thought I was not good enough. And we just agreed, right? So psychologically, we were a perfect match, right? Perfect match. Perfect match. I tell you, entire marriages are built on this stuff. And, oh God, every day in some way or another he would let me know I wasn't good enough. It was this kind of relentless criticism, and that was okay with me because it matched my own mindset. Until, precipitating life shock, we were having a row, and suddenly my back was to the wall and his hands were around my throat. And something happened to me in that moment. I felt my enoughness, especially as a woman, rise from the dead like Lazarus. I mean, it was like, woof. And I just wasn't having it anymore. Enough. It's just enough of this, enough of not being enough, enough. And obviously I ended the relationship, but it took a life shot that big for me to just wake up and just get over it, just get over it. Stop now. And I really took a stand to find a partner who could let me be powerful. It took me quite a long time to find him. I had other relationships and there were bumps along the way. But when I met my husband, he came and did a workshop that I was teaching. And I said, why don't you do it when one of my colleagues is doing it? You know, it makes me the teacher and you the student. I think it's a bit weird. And he said, I really want to do it. And then someone on the course said, why are you doing it when she's teaching it? They thought it was a bit weird. And my training partner at the time called on him on Friday night, said, "Why are you here, John?" He said, "Because I want to marry her." That was a life shock I liked. And I really liked that life shock. And he said, "I'm here because Sophie needs to know that I can be with her amazingness and still feel completely okay about myself." And I went, there's my man, there's my person. And I worked for him. I worked to find him. I worked hard on what was in here to find someone who could see me in that way. So reality aligning shifts in perception. And one other example I can share is I remember shifting from I am terminal to out the box, we're all terminal. We're all terminal. So I'm not so special, right? But I've had the privilege of being put on notice. So now what will I do with my one wild and precious life? How will I be with every moment that I'm given from here on in? And in that moment, cancer became grace for me. Pure grace. Getting a feel for reality aligning shifts in perception. Okay. Next comes reality-based choices. I'll keep emphasizing reality-based. So I gave you an example of this earlier. I don't need to embellish this much more. I choose to live between the space between my fierce will to live and my necessary willingness to die. That's a reality-based choice right there. And we can make them every day. I think the talk we had this morning, a lot of it was about making reality-based choices, like I'll go for a 15-minute walk and then a 30-minute walk and then like that. Just keep it, like that. Sometimes just keep it real, keep it simple, but keep it aligned with reality and in response to limits and possibilities, both. Because we need to simultaneously overcome the false limitations we have imposed upon ourselves while surrendering to the true limitations set by life, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, set by life. We need to do both those things. And then we can make realistic choices, realistic commitments, realistic changes to our behavior and the results that we want to create. But we need to look out for our unconscious conditions. So, have you ever noticed that there are times you say you're going to do something and part of you doesn't get it? Have you ever noticed that? And there are other times that you say you're going to do it and it's like a full body commitment, I'm all the way in. You can physically feel the difference, I'm all the way in. So when the part of you doesn't get it, when you say I'm going to do something and part of you doesn't get it, that's almost invariably because you have some unconscious conditions at play. And there's a very simple way you can make those conditions conscious. And that's by using two words, provided that. So, I will lose 10 pounds, provided that, and this just flushes it out. I don't get hungry and no one offers me chocolate. It's in there, right? It's just in there. I will stop snapping at my daughter, provided that she does what I say. I will shut my judgmental mouth, provided you don't piss me off. And on it goes. Or, I will apply for this job, provided that I'm qualified. I will stay in this relationship, provided that you respect me. So, for the ones that aren't helpful, I often just write them down, or my provided that's when I've made a commitment, and they're quite funny a lot of the time, they're highly entertaining. And you can turn those into, I will lose 10 pounds even if I get hungry and someone offers me chocolate. I will not snap at my daughter even if she doesn't do what I say. See how you just make that conscious? Even if. Or you just include the ones that serve you in the intention. So I'll be in a relationship with you provided that you treat me with respect. That's one I would choose to keep. So you can turn, now these really undermine the change that lasts. You know, you can get out of the box and get into your creativity and make a commitment, and then these crafty little provided that's just sneak in. Because this guy, by the way, is extremely crafty and wants to be in control and will take back control in any way it can. So when you get out of your comfort zone and out of the box, you're in charge and it's not in charge anymore. So it's going to try and find a way to take charge again. Go, yeah, but only if, you know, provided that. What if someone offers you like that? And it's got you again. Vigilance, people, vigilance. Okay, so unconscious conditions. Which brings me to the most blech one of them all. The most resisted of them all, which is surrendering control. So this is the willingness to embrace vulnerability and failure. So if you want to create lasting change and you want to stay comfortable, good luck with that. Just good luck with that. So there is really no lasting change or transformation without vulnerability and without failure. And without, I don't mean risking failure, I mean actually failing several times over and over again and being willing to embrace failure as part of the process. Being willing to be vulnerable, to be uncomfortable, to step away from your conditioning. I mean, the box is very comfortable, people. You know, I'm up to my neck in shit, but I've been here so long, it's very comfortable, thank you very much. So I think I'll hang around here a bit longer. Because it's comfortable, it's familiar, it's what I know. So to step out of that takes some courage and some vulnerability and some willingness to open yourself up to what's coming and not actually have control. There are things you can control. You can control what you think. You can control how you behave. But you can't control what life throws at you. So there's a break in the word breakthrough, in case you hadn't noticed. There's a break in the word breakthrough. There's something to break from in order to break through. So the willingness to be vulnerable is very, very important. Again, we need to overcome the self-imposed limitations and surrender to the real limitations. Both. That's having our power and our limits all at once. All at once. So there are the, I mean, you know, I remember sitting in the oncology waiting room. I was waiting for radiotherapy to my C3. I had a tumor on my C3 vertebra. And I could feel the fear stalking the corridors of the hospital, but it was all very British. I mean, eyes were cast down, upper lips were stiff. No one was saying, are you freaked out? Are you as freaked out as me? I mean, no one was saying anything. It was fascinating. So someone sent me a text and that touched my heart. I started crying. So I'm sitting in the waiting room crying, which I was good with that. It's fine. The Macmillan nurse comes running over to me, spilling her own anxiety into my lap, like boof, like, have my anxiety. Are you okay? Are you okay? Subtext, please stop crying. Please stop crying. I mean, I could feel her anxiety. And I took a very deep breath and I looked around the room and I looked at her and I went, do you know what? I think I might be the only person here who is. It seemed entirely congruent with my, I've been told I'm going to not make Christmas. I think it's entirely congruent to be crying. I mean, I was scared, but I was grief-stricken. I was completely grief-stricken about the future I was losing. and about the things that I hadn't done in my life and the dreams I hadn't fulfilled. I mean, I was on my knees with grief for weeks. It just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And I just kept letting it come and come and come. Surrender, 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 surrender. You know, I have not toughed this thing out at all. I've let grief have its way with me when it needed to have its way with me. And through that, I was able to pick up dreams I'd left on the shelf. I'd wanted to write since I was 10 years old. I can do that. I thought, I can do that. And there was one night when I was so ill, 2017, brain tumours round 3, I'd lost my balance. I was incredibly ill again, and I was lying in bed and I told myself, you may not wake up. If you close your eyes, you may not wake up. I could just feel myself going. I could feel myself going. And I remember just taking 3 very deep breaths and saying, if this is my time, I accept my time. And I was both, and then I said the words, thy will be done, as I closed my eyes. And when I said those words, I felt peaceful and griefful all at the same time. But it was an incredibly extraordinary moment for me. I was very glad to wake up in the morning, obviously. But I thought, I can even do this out of the box. Even this, I can do out of the box. I mean, that brings me incredible peace to know that I can respond to death in the way I choose to respond to death. So vulnerability and surrender are part of transformation and lasting change. Okay. Now, attuned creativity. This isn't something you particularly do. It's more that this starts to just flow through you when you have shifted your perceptions, made reality-based choices, surrendered what you can't control. When you've done all of that, creativity just starts to flow and move and like that. But it's attuned with life as it really is. It's attuned with, I haven't got rid of my cancer, but I'm creative with my cancer. I mean, that's the reality of my life. So I'm attuned to what life has sent me like that. We're attuned, and possibilities start to crack open that you just couldn't see. So when you shift your perceptions, it's like a fog, a mist, great mist lifts. And suddenly there's this orchard of ripe plums waiting to be picked. And they've been waiting for you all the time. All the time. They've been waiting for you to see them and claim them and suck the juice out of what's on offer. They've always been sitting there. So in that sense, there's a lot of truth seekers in my world, seekers of truth. Let's be seekers of lies. Let's be lie seekers. Let's track the lies, hunt them down and slay them. Slay, I'm not good enough. Slay, I'm unworthy. Slay, I'm unlovable. Slay it. Because when we do that, truth is just what remains. You don't have to then find the truth. It just shows up. Does that make sense? Because it's always sitting there waiting for you to see it. So if you're thinking the truth, you're probably not in the truth. And this is really important in our post-truth era. You know, a certain president of the United States right now is appealing to a lot of people who live in the box. That's his voting power, by the way. That's a big part of his voting power. So let's be lie seekers rather than truth seekers. And then when we get that out of the way, then the creativity can flow like a river. Because there are the changes and successes that we seek, right? But then there are the changes and the successes that seek us. That seek us. And in that meeting place lies your path in life, I suggest, lies your destiny. In that meeting point. I had no plans to become a patient activist or work with cancer patients, really. I had no desire to do that, or plans to do that, or nothing in me had that in mind, obviously. But life had that in mind for me. You know, I was called into it, I was pulled into it. When that nurse dumped her anxiety on my knee and I sat in that anxious waiting room, that's when I decided to write The Cancer Whisperer, to say it's okay to be scared and angry and full of grief, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to work through that when this is happening to you. Boom. So I have a really dear friend who lost her son to suicide at the age of 14. And it nearly broke her, and her husband. It nearly broke them. Ugh. That's as tough as it gets, right? But she does this work, and she trusts her life shocks. And she said, I just kept holding on to my the life shocks. There's something here for me, there's something here for me, there's something here for me. There's something for me to awaken to. And it took her about 10 years, but she's now, she's created an organization called Mind Peace, and she works with mothers who've lost their children to suicide. And she's alive and vibrant, and life called her into that. You know, life had, that was not her choice. You see how that works? So that I'm heading in this direction, and then something happens and pulls me in this direction. We need to pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. Finally, on these factors, bold support. So, when you're making a change, you need someone at your side who's going to hold your feet to the fire. So I don't mean support like it doesn't matter that you ate that biscuit. Have another one. Not that. This is, well, you said you wouldn't do that. What happened? What are you telling yourself? How did you talk yourself out of that? What provided that kicked in? You know, what's going on? Like that. I have a fellow teacher of this particular work, and we speak once a month. She lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she's this really feisty Texan lesbian who adopted 2 black sons and lives on the Bible Belt in America. Yeah, she's something else. So we speak once a month and go, how are you doing with what you set out to do, like that. If you go in the 12-step program, you get a sponsor who you call on. So if you want to make significant changes, behavioural change, if you want them to last, get support. Otherwise, the crafty little sucker will have its way with you. You know, it's a very powerful force, and you need someone who's going to stand with you. I know I wouldn't be alive today if my husband hadn't been at my side, because there have been times when I've believed I can't bear it anymore. I can't bear it anymore. I want to go now. And he reminds me how much I've already borne, and why I've borne it, and why it's all still worth bearing. He does that for me. You know, bold support. So I'm just going to summarize how we can shift. Now, I want you to know that what I'm talking about today, like the boxes, I normally take people through experientially over 2 days. See, I've given you a whistle-stop tour today, and if any of you really want to learn some of these tools and learn how to shift and learn how to live this way, I've got outside in the break, I've got a little printout of the boxes. You can come and grab my business card. I'm running a course in February in London. So if you're interested in doing the work I'm talking about, come and find out about me. And I've also got some books if you want a signed copy. So I'm just going to briefly summarize this because it needs to be experienced. But I hope I've brought it to life as much as I can in the past hour or so. So how to shift. Precipitating life shock will come your way. Then you attend to the life shock. And there's a particular process we teach to do that. You literally re-experience the life shock, and you can get very good at that. And you get all your you just write down all your mind talk, I call it. You get it all out, and you challenge it and verify it. Everything we think is either true, false, or don't know, by the way. Everything is either true, false, or don't know. I remember when my medical team were giving me my use-by date, I just needed to stand really firmly in, I don't know, and nor do they know my use-by date. I don't know that. Sometimes just not knowing is enough to get you out of the box. So then we make shifts in perceptions, then we make reality-based choices, and boom, we go from there. And obviously there are the other things like surrender and control. But these are the three things that get you from in the box to out of the box. Now, just to bring this home, let's keep this real. We're not caterpillars. We're not caterpillars that metamorphosize into butterflies. We are human beings, and we are designed to evolve. We're designed to learn and fall and fail and rise again and stand in our humanity and stand in our glory and take charge of our lives while recognizing we're not in charge of Life Central because that job is taken. So sometimes the changes don't last because they're the wrong changes, or because they're motivated by your self-deception in the first place. That's a clue. Sometimes change takes a lot of time because we need to peel away layer after layer after layer of self-deception until we just come home to ourselves. And when we come home to ourselves, change gets very easy, in fact. And sometimes the thing we most need to change is the belief that we need to change. So, yes, notice your state, shift your perceptions, make your choices, get into your creativity, attend to your provided. That's yes to all of that. And drop your expectations, because expectations live in the box. They're part of being in the box. Drop that. Be more compassionate. Be more forgiving. Give yourself room to screw up and fail and grow, and give yourself room for all of that. And just to put this in some academic context, this is a model created by Professor William Talbot. It's based on Lervinger's model of childhood development. In the 70s, she traced and identified stages of childhood development. And again, if you want to know more about this, it's in the handout, and you're welcome to contact me about it. So these are stages of development that we go through. Each new stage is precipitated by a significant life shock, by the way. Most people, so it goes from impulsive, which is really baby, babies are impulsive. Opportunist is like, how many of you have kids? Anyone have kids? So when they're 2, they're very I, my, me, and mine, right? When you're 2 years old, you're an opportunist. So the world exists to serve me. Can I have? Can I? Yes, no. I like that. They're very good at saying no. And they grow out of that phase. It's a really important phase to go through. We need to go through all these phases. But some adults get stuck in them. Dare I mention a certain president of the United States who is stuck in opportunism. That is where he's at. He thinks he's an achiever, and so do his followers. But Torber actually wrote an article and profiled him against this model to explain why he was an opportunist. And the tragedy of that is he can't be any different to how he's being. He can't. It's not that he won't, he can't. He's stuck there. And dictators, this is where dictators operate from. So something happens in our lives and the mindset freezes us in that stage of development. Now, the diplomat is the phase of, my daughter's in it really, of belonging and fitting in. And she has to have a certain type of socks because her friends have these socks, and it's really important to be the same. As an adult, that's anything from, it's about joining a group, ISIS, diplomats. It's an odd word for that group, but that's the psychology. And when you move into expertise, now I don't need to belong. Now I've found out what I'm good at, right? And I become my expertise. I'm an accountant, I'm a writer, I'm a football player, like that. And suddenly I'm an expert at something. Then I move into achieving. Now I am my success. And I'm all about achievement, etc., etc. So I don't want to get into these in details. Most adults profile at expert and achiever in the Western world. Vast majority. I don't know the percentages, but it's between 60 and 70% profile at those levels. And this is primarily done this has been scientifically validated for several decades, this particular model. And those stages are what's called conventional. And then it moves into post-conventional. And actually redefining is becoming conventional because more and more people are profiling at this level, which is very exciting. You know, there's a whole movement of awakening. And redefining is really that point in your life where, okay, I've achieved all this, but I still don't really know who I am. I still don't really know who I am. So now I start inquiring again. And I become fluid instead of fixed. And, you know, I ask lots and lots of questions, and I start seeking and searching and like that. I work with a not-for-profit charity that is, I think the entire board are redefiners. The leadership would all profile at redefining, probably. Never get anything done. Never. I mean, decisions just don't get made because they're all inquiring all the time and everyone's having a say and everyone's having a conflab and a consultation and can we make a consensus decision which takes like a decade and then the whole world's moved on again. So you don't want your board being run entirely by redefiners. And then these get harder to explain because an achiever can't see a transformer or an alchemist because they're not there yet. Do you get that? They can't see them. But transforming, which is what we're talking about today, transformational capabilities become very powerful at this level. You can attend to self, others, and context at the same time, and you can see the system as well as you see things systemically. And it's hard to describe this space, but it's a transforming space. Level of development, and only, this is my point, 10% of people profile at this level. 10%, which in the world of flooded market of transformational practitioners peddling so-called transformational products is very interesting, do you not think? There's so many transformational consultants in the market, but actually, are they change experts? Like that? Or are they truly capable of transformation, or of transforming an entire business or culture, for example? Not many. Very good to have one on your board, if you've got some in the business. Very often they're more junior people in the business. The business is run by experts and achievers, and the transformers just feel like they want to escape because they see possibilities that their leaders can't see. Lots of stories I have about that. An alchemic is more Mandela ending apartheid from a prison cell. So I'm not going to get more into that right now, but in Shakespearean times, the alchemist was the fool and was a very recognized character in society and the only person who could challenge the king. But we often call alchemists crazy. They're often invisible. It's a very, very lonely place to reach in life. It's a lonely phase of development because they live with paradox. Dark and light is the same. They see the light in the darkness, not beyond the darkness. So it can be a lonely place, and we often assassinate them. Literally, Martin Luther King, John Lennon. We have a tendency to assassinate alchemists. So the point I want you to take here is if you're creating lasting change, there's a lot you can do to make that happen. And sometimes it's okay to just change incrementally and to evolve and move forwards a little bit more and a little bit more. It doesn't always need to be a complete 180-degree shift. And we can develop ourselves towards that capability more and more and more. As my beloved teacher used to say, the process of awakening, I found it, I lost it, I found it again. Then repeat. How I miss him in my life, I tell you. So I'm going to leave it there. We have some time for questions now.
So first of all, thank you for the beautiful talk.
You're welcome.
I have two questions, although maybe it's actually one. So there are some people who, they start from being very bad at something, or at least this is what they hear, and it can be people in sports, entrepreneurs, businessmen, and they work really hard at that until they become very successful, and maybe at some point they are like top of the world even in the area. Mm-hmm. And I have to think, having read interviews, autobiographies and stuff, I can tell that comes also from being in the box of survival, obligation, or proving.
Sometimes.
So that can actually sometimes be very positive in a way, because it leads you to a different state later. So I wanted to know what you think about that. And also, when you say reality-based choices, reality, even though I get what you're saying, but isn't reality also something that we perceive differently? Like, but reality for someone is different. Like you mentioned the two sisters, or even the President of the United States, who his reality might say, people voted for me, I am rich, so I am great, I am an achiever. Or, for example, if I was surrounded by certain people, and my relationships are not very good with them, I might think I'm not a good friend, but then I find someone else, I get out of the circle, and actually I can be a good friend, it's just they were the right people for me. But in that moment I think, I can see this is the reality because all my relationships are bad, so how...
Okay, two questions, so I'm going to take them one at a time. The first is about, there are people who are very successful and achieve a lot from the boxes of survival, obligation, and desire. That's absolutely true. And not wrong either. I want to emphasize it's not wrong to be in the box. It's normal, human, and actually normal. I mean, it's far more, most of the world is doing that. So there's nothing wrong with it. The only point I want to make about it is that those achievements always come at an unnecessary price. There's an unnecessary price that we pay, be it a cost to our relationships, be it burning out, be it high stress levels, be it finding yourself incredibly wealthy and rich and lonely. So you can create an enormous amount out of these states, but there's always a price. And ultimately, they're unsustainable, ultimately. Often health is a price that we pay. I have no doubt that whatever part I played in my disease, I sowed those seeds when I was living in desire in my 20s. Because I did some pretty self-destructive things at that time. So ultimately, I paid a price, you know. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I really get this, I was really hoping not to get into this, but here we are. Life has put it to me. The nature of reality. I mean, we could do PhDs on the nature of reality, right? And I'm aware it's a controversial area. So I want to distinguish. I think part of what you're describing, like those sisters, that's personal reality. How I perceive the world is my personal reality, right? That's my personal reality. That's how I would call that. Versus the wall is a wall, right? It's a wall. Now, again, this is controversial because I was once trained by a landmark trainer for 3 weeks, and there's a lot to be said for landmark. But we came to blows at this point in time when she was saying the wall is only a wall because you perceive it as a wall. And if you change your perception, it would become energy and you would be able to walk through the wall. I said, go on then. Go on then. Walk your talk, please. Naturally, she didn't walk through the wall, which is where I parted ways with that particular methodology. And there are similarities, but I mean, their basic premise is life is empty and meaningless. It has no meaning other than the meaning that you give it. So whatever meaning you give it becomes your reality. And they're not the only school that say that. Whereas I chose what Brad called, you know, life is full of meaning and purpose. It's not empty, it's full of meaning. And there is no event by which and through which life itself is not trying to awaken you to your highest and noblest self. There is no event by which and through which life itself is not trying to awaken you to your most loving, authentic, and creative self. That's the philosophy that I live by. And that's a wall to me. I'm going to call that reality because that's a wall. It's telling me I'm a wall. I can feel it and hear it and boom, that's a wall. So there's a difference between this is a reality and then there's how I perceive the reality. That's my personal reality. I think it's a very attractive wall. You might say, that becomes your personal reality. I really like that wall. It's an ugly wall. Now we're playing with that. Now there's a different reality. So I could go on about this, but I hope that speaks to it to some degree. And it's a very big debate, the nature of reality. I completely respect that. So who else has a question?
Hi. I think it's like one of the trends now is to us to set up very strict boundaries, yeah, which not necessarily can be very smart. But I'm just curious about your opinion between these boundaries, which I think it contradicts a bit with the part of surrendering control and reality-based choices. And just to give a simple example.
Yeah, that would help.
I decided that a friend is not going to call me for like 5 months. I don't want to be friends with him. So it's like something like this.
Okay, so you're asking about where does boundaries sit in all of this, and how does that relate to reality-based choices? And the example being, my friend hasn't called me for 5 months, so they're not going to be my friend anymore. Right, so there's no generic answer to this question. You have to really go inside and ask yourself some questions. So you can do that in the box, and it's a reaction, because they should phone me at least once a month. They're lousy friends if they don't call me. I'm resentful that they're not calling me. This is how I think friends should behave, and they let me down, and I'm in judgment, right? So that's a reaction, and therefore I'm not going to see you anymore. Like that. That's one way you can do it, right? I'm not going to be your friend anymore. Like, we're in the playground because you didn't meet my expectations of how I think a friend should be. Okay? Or there's being outside the box and being very clear about what you value and what matters to you, and where you stand in your life. So, I mean, when I was diagnosed, it was very interesting to me. Some of my closest friends just left my life. I mean, they were just gone. I came to understand that later. I mean, it puts your mortality in your face, and people get anxious about, I don't know how to be with this or what to say. And so, you know, I get it. And other friends just showed up, who I hadn't seen for 20 years, some of them. They just started showing up in my life. But I got very clear that I'm not really up for small talk in my life anymore. You know, if you want to have a conversation with me, let's have a real conversation. Let's not push the air around. Most talking is pushing the air around. And I don't know how long I've got in this life, in this world, but I want my relationships to be real. I want to be authentic with you, and I want you to be authentic with me. That's what I want, because I don't have much time to waste on moving the air around. I really don't. And in fact, one of my closest friends and I had had a big row, falling out before I was diagnosed. She wrote me a letter saying, you know, I want to find solace in one another again, and can we be friends, and can we put it behind us? And I said, well, no, I'd like to have a conversation with you about what happened and clear it up and tell the truth to each other and clean up the mess that we made. Can we do that? And we could have even someone support us to do that, but I want to do that. And she wasn't up for it. She said, I just want to be back in your life. I said, you don't get to be my friend because I'm dying. No, you don't get to do that. So if you want to be real with me and get truthful with me, my door's open. If you don't, my door's closed. And that's the boundary I've set, and I stand by. And my husband spares me a lot of moving the air around in certain contexts of my life that I won't name right now. That's a difference. So it's really, where are you coming from when you set the boundary? Are you taking a stand out of the box, or are you reacting and pissed off and and only you know where it's coming from.
Thank you very much for your lecture and for sharing so much. I wondered about the boxes, and is there a logic by which one is in the centre and the others are gradually further out?
Yes, there is a logic in that impossibility has the least room to move. Survival, more room to move. Obligation, more room to move. Proving, really quite a lot of room to move and make things happen. Creating, it's very expanded. That's the only reason it's that way. You know, impossibility is there's nowhere to go. But you don't need to go through all the boxes to get out. You know, you can go from impossibility to creativity like that. In fact, often, have you ever just hit the wall and then suddenly you've just popped into a different space because there's actually no place else to go but out. So sometimes when you get into impossibility, then you suddenly are able to leap out because that's really the only option other than giving up. So that's that. Yeah, lady with the glasses on the end.
I just wonder, it just keeps coming to my mind, non-violent communication, and it just feels like it goes to the heart of everything you're talking about.
Can you say what goes to the heart?
Non-violent communication.
Non-violent communication, I missed that bit.
Yeah, so can you say a little bit about that? Do you know?
It's not an area of specialism for me, but let me just give you my take on it. Violence only happens in the box. You know, when we're in a reactive state, that's when we become violent, because by definition the box is separating. I separate from you, I separate from life, I separate from even my sense of my own humanity. We dehumanize people in the box. Racism comes from the box. All prejudice, prejudgment comes from the box. Piers Morgan lives in the box. You want to see reactivity at work? You know, there's a violence in his communication with people. He's violent, and he has no idea. It's utterly justified bullying. There's a violence that he speaks with that one of the Labour, Lisa, what's she called? She just sorted him the other day. She was awesome. She was just right in her power, and she wasn't having it. But I've seen that kind of violent communication, and it comes from I'm right and you're wrong. It comes from I'm better than you and you're worse than me. And it comes from closing the heart because I'm so traumatized and so unwilling to face my own pain that I'm going to flick my pain on you. And those that play superior and bully and speak violently are the ones with the lowest self-worth, I suggest. The lowest self-worth. Because when we know our true worth, when you know that, you do not need to stand on anybody else's neck to feel good about yourself. Microphone down here. I can see you right at the back. We're going to come to you. We'll come one down here and then we'll come up to you at the top. Getting your exercise today, aren't you? Getting your steps in.
Yeah, I just want to admit that when you said the wall is a wall, and it was a boundary and it was reality of the wall, my first thought was, oh, I'd get a bulldozer.
Well, you could.
Is that narcissistic, unrealistic, or what?
That you'd want to get a bulldozer.
I can't accept the wall's a wall and I can't get through it, so I would phone up and get a bulldozer.
Well, it's an option.
What pathology is that?
What pathology is that? Well, I think it's called stubbornness. Let's go to the gentleman at the back. I think that's called bloody-minded stubbornness.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Questions about surrender and vulnerability. So we hear a lot about surrender and vulnerability. And my question's about where it's appropriate. Because you talked a lot about not just moving the air around. We all know when that's happening. And I guess that can be okay too as well. So particularly as men, but maybe this isn't just applicable to men, but you know, vulnerability, it gets you a certain point, but maybe there's a sort of boundary there as well, because nobody just wants to hear your vulnerability the whole time.
Yeah, no, I don't recommend being vulnerable the whole time. So let me be really clear about this, and I really appreciate the point about men, because the highest cause of death for men in their 40s at this time is suicide. It's killing more men than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. In fact, loneliness is now the #1 killer in the Western world. I could give you a whole talk about that. So I really appreciate the questions. So let me be clear about vulnerability. Vulnerability to me means I'm open. I'm open rather than closed. Sometimes I'm just really, really vulnerable. I'm in pain, or I'm in grief, or I'm in sadness. And it's important to be discerning about the context that you're in. So I don't bring my vulnerability to everyone I meet. I do not take my vulnerability to my daughter's school. And when I'm standing at the school gates or we're chatting in the corridors, I move the air around. I do. Oh, God, the shame of it. I do move the air around. I don't want to be vulnerable in that context. It's not where I want to be vulnerable. But I know I need to go there in the right places, with people I trust, with a therapist maybe, or with my husband, or so, of course, be discerning. What I love about boundaries is they're not walls. When you've got walls up, there's zero vulnerability. But boundaries, you can be vulnerable and powerful at the same time. So when I have my heart open and my backbone is strong, I'm in my power and I'm in my vulnerability, both. But don't be vulnerable without backbone. Get that? And don't do backbone without vulnerability. It's about finding that balance between the two, and be discerning about where you allow yourself to be vulnerable. But also be discerning about the extent to which you avoid it, shut it down, and do whatever you can to not go there, because ultimately it will catch up with you, ultimately. So I hope that answers your question best I can.
On your global leadership profile, the last one was ironic. You didn't say what it was.
Oh, someone always has to ask about ironic. There's always one. Always one. Okay, oh my goodness. Of course, people who profile are ironic don't profile, right? Why would they do a profile? I mean, they're just way beyond profiling. So I don't think anyone, maybe 2 or 3 people have profiled at this level. But what I can give you is a couple of examples, because I did this in my mid-30s, I guess, and I did profile at Alchemic, but a couple of my responses were ironic. So all I can do is give you an example of that. So the way this works is you do a sentence completion. There's lots of sentences for you to complete, and you just complete the sentences, and it reveals a lot about the way you perceive life and the way you make meaning, effectively. And there are things like my father, ... or when a child is bullied, ... and you respond to the questions. So there was this one question, I'm not sure it's still in the profile. There's one that says, a man is lucky because. A man is lucky because, ... And do you know what the most standard, this is an expert response, is? They can pee standing up. That is the most popular response to, a man is lucky because they can pee standing up. I mean, really. So anyway, back to your question. So I answered a question that said, and I can't remember the exact answer, it said something like, women are lucky because. And I said something like, women are lucky because we have been oppressed politically, sexually, economically for so many centuries that we have tapped an inner power that our brothers are yet to tap in the world. or something like that. We've tapped an inner power and an authenticity and a courage, you know, that our brothers haven't had to find because they've always dominated. Something like that. That was considered an ironic answer. Does that help?
Yeah.
I think it was in Women Are Lucky because we've been oppressed. That was the ironic piece. Thank you for your attention.